My name is David. I'm the community manager here at Trilitech, and today I'm here to host an AMA with Arthur. So, Arthur, why don't you say hi, introduce yourself? I'm assuming all people already know who you are, but it's good to say hi.
Apologize. I came down with a flu yesterday, so I'm going to sound a little sick, but I'll do my best to answer the questions regardless.
Amazing. Thank you. So over the past day, I have gathered questions from Twitter, Discord, and Telegram under hashtag Tezos AMA. And we've gathered them, and now I'm here to ask them to Arthur live for all of you. So the first thing I want to talk about, Arthur, is that the Tezos Foundation last Friday released a statement on what's been going on in 2023 this year, and also their plans for 2024. So could you share what changes the community should expect from the Tezos Foundation in 2024 regarding that statement? I mean,
there's a couple of things in that statement. Specifically, when I joined the board of the Tezos Foundation in 2021, it was a boom. It was a boom time. It was the beginning of a raging bull market in 2021, and unfortunately, we had accumulated years and years of dysfunction around several parts of the ecosystem, but it also coincided with a time where the balance sheet of the foundation just became very large, and there was a desire to do something quickly, even without necessarily the structure in place to do things. When the bear market turned, and that's starting around March and April of 2022, the strategy shifted towards more cost rationalization. But I would say that this only really kicked into gear at the beginning of 2023, and the foundation has somewhere between 500 million and 600 million in assets. And so it's not running out of money by any means, but it is very important to use the funds in a manner that's very effective. And as opposed, I would say the thinking in 2021 was, will this help the ecosystem? Yes. There was a risk basically of the ecosystem faltering and the foundation having a bunch of money and not actually deploying it. Unfortunately, that strategy didn't work. And so now the foundation is far more focused on cost efficiency. It's not just a matter of saying is this thing useful? Is this thing a net positive? But rather, what is the ROI on this? What is the actual impact on the spend? And looking carefully at cost. And I don't think it precludes a situation where the foundation would spend more aggressively. But I would say this would only happen if there's a proven path between the spending and the outcome. If and when we have something like this, there's a possibility of deploying funds more aggressively. But I think so far we don't. And until such a time as we do, it's best to be conservative and to do the things that historically we do best. So that was the part, I would say that the main part of the blog post was around this. And sometimes you'll see initiatives which are defunded, which can be net positive as initiatives, but where the ROI sometimes is not there, they can be very costly. In terms of communication as well, I would say that the Tezos Foundation has lacked basically a communication department for a couple of years now. It's been very hard to find the right tone in communications, but that's changing, and there's a lot more communication, blog posts, tweets coming out of the Tezos Foundation, and we should expect a lot more of that in 2024.
Amazing. Thank you, Arthur. Let's get right into the AMA part of this. So the first question comes from thehapsoul.tez. Although maybe not a priority, could dynamic baking rights be a feasible option to stop mass over-delegation by large exchange bakers, which could potentially hurt decentralization? Or is there a better solution?
I'm not super familiar with the problem, but I assume that what's going on is exchanges by default delegate to their bakers, and then they don't really bother putting enough of a bond, so they're actually leaving money on the table. But as a result, without having much of a bond, they still have a lot of voting power. Dynamic baking rights probably would be to not allocate baking rights to bakers who are over-delegated. Everything that we do takes time and resources. So yes, we can start, we could work on those things, and anyone could work on those things and submit a patch, actually. But we have to prioritize. And if I have to think, is this more important to do this and to do latency reduction, to ship the data availability layer and all of that? Probably not, because and some things are easy to implement. This is a bit tricky to implement. It doesn't necessarily work very well with light clients, because for a good light client, you want the set of bakers to be very predictable and not, change very quickly. And also, if you're looking at proposals like adaptive issuance, they essentially somewhat get rid of the over delegation problem in the first place. So I would look forward to things like that. I actually wrote a document recently. I'll clean it up and share it publicly, it's a list of changes in the L1 that if I woke up tomorrow and they were implemented, it would be a good thing, but it's not necessarily worth doing because of the time and resources they would take. And there's some interesting ideas in there, and I might put that in there, but it's probably the effort that it would require to change this compared to the benefit would be small, especially since exchanges typically don't vote anyway. I would say a better point of impact would be to ensure that people actually do not have as many assets on exchanges and take self-custody. I think that's important, while recognizing that it's not for everyone. And also ensuring that the issues around exchanges right now are not decentralization, they're more around quorum. And I think revisiting quorums for voting might be necessary. We've been pretty close to missing quorums in the past couple proposals. It's getting to be a bit of an issue. I don't think exchanges can't vote. It was a good example of Algorand forcing exchanges to vote, the Algorand protocol forcing that, and Coinbase deciding that they were going to vote based on this. So it's not impossible to make it happen.
All right. Thank you so much. The next question comes from CCDDBB, who asks, would the Tezos Foundation consider creating a DAO to support art on Tezos in synergy with the already existing and thriving community?
So there's a proto DAO that exists on chain, the ecosystem DAO. I don't know that there needs to be a separate DAO to support the art ecosystem. I think the same can be used. I say a proto DAO because right now it's a multi-sig, and it can definitely be improved. The simplest way to improve it would be to upgrade a smart contract to have bakers be able to override the multi-sig. I would love if someone came up with a proposal to do that with some code to do it. And the funds in it are modest, but I think the funds in it could be larger if it demonstrates success over time in funding those initiatives.
All right, amazing. The next question comes from Violet Bond, who asks, why are the community/marketing/art team of Trilitech so inactive and unknown to the Tezos community here? Assuming that's on Twitter. We need more information coming into the ecosystem.
Yeah. So, and I see also part of this question saying Trilitech has just 1,000 followers. Originally, it's been always very important to me to really drive home the distinction between Tezos, the blockchain, and the various entities at the periphery which are involved in the Tezos ecosystem. Be there the Tezos Foundation, Trilitech, Nomadic Labs, TZ Epox, and Tezos Commons, all others. They are not Tezos. Tezos is Tezos, the blockchain. When it comes to communication, the first strategy that they suggested to me was that essentially all communications would be done by the handles of the respective entity. So you would have, Nomadic Lab would communicate about what Nomadic Lab is doing through the Nomadic Lab handle, and Trilitech would communicate over it through the Trilitech handle, and so on and so forth with the Tezos Foundation, so Tezos Foundation handle. That's the thing that makes sense. There was a lot of criticism of that approach. It was not effective because people had to follow multiple accounts. They were confused. We had most people following the Tezos handle on Twitter. And if you take the pragmatic view of pushing information and communication to as many people as possible, it's useful to use things like the Tezos handle, for example, or the Tezos channel on YouTube. So it's not that people at Nomadic Labs, the Tezos Foundation, or Trilitech are not active. It's just that it's not Trilitech branded. There was not a strong desire to brand to the Trilitech branded communication, because there's no point. It should not be about Trilitech. It should not be about Nomadic Lab. It should be about Tezos. But generally speaking, I would say the Trilitech staff actively looking to find better ways to engage with the community. So if you've seen in the last 3 months, there's been about 25 different community calls. And 6 months ago, they weren't any done from within Trilitech. So that's increasing a lot. And from what I know, I think there's a further increase in 2024. But primarily, I would say community managers should be the primary conduits between the various experts in various ecosystem entities and the wider community. So there's a social media and PR team, and they've been focused on driving other areas which are of interest to the community, specifically increasing PR awareness with journalists, more regular social posting, among other things. As for arts, there's a dedicated community managers, and Pranaya has been active in the Tezos community for years, and suggestions on what you want to hear about the arts vertical, and you should make directly those requests to him, and he'll pass them along.
Thank you so much, Arthur. The next question comes from Tezos Caveman, who asks, Have you thought about the timeline for when the L1 crystallizes into its final-ish form and core updates become more rare? Is it 5 years, 20 years, or 100 years? How does your estimate compare with your expectations when initially developing? Did it get longer or shorter?
That's a great question, and definitely longer than when I started developing. And it's not a binary event. I would say that they're going to become more rare and more rare. And in fact, they already have. Like, I don't foresee a lot of major changes on L1. I have a wish list for L1 and what I'd like to fix, but especially with the Tezos 2.0 roadmap, the idea is to move most of the development inside of a big canonical rollup and to have the L1 focus on what it does best, which is settlement, consensus, staking, and little else. And as a result, what you will see, it's less relevant to put features into the virtual machines or features into the L1. In fact, if anything, the L1 might become simpler over time. So the main thing I think about when I think about work on the L1 today are latency reduction, which matters even with layer 2 solutions. The data availability layer, the sharding aspect of that's very important. And perhaps work on the staking and the economics of staking around adaptive issuance. And that's mostly it. There's a couple more things we could add. Stateless clients, for example. But again, if most of your state is an L2 state, it doesn't matter as much. So those are really the three big ones. So to answer the question, I would say it's more of an horizon of 5 years. To a large extent, I would say most of the problems, of the known technical problems that existed in the blockchain space, in some sense, I feel have been solved.
Thank you so much. The next question comes from 42 Waves, who asks, what lessons are Trilitech / the Tezos Foundation learning from Solana's recent success? They've partnered with Coinbase, sold out their Saga phones, and are now 6th on CMC. This is the level I hope Tezos would be at by now.
Well, there's definitely a lot to learn by looking at the success of Solana. There are things that cannot be replicated. For example, we cannot replicate being propped up by a billion-dollar criminal operation. But there are the things that we can. I think they were very effective at developer acquisition early on. They've been very effective in their VC relationship, but that's hard to replicate because it boils down to a lot of the Solana floats being held by VCs. So we can't do a lot of those things, but there's still a lot to learn. But it's hard. A lot of it is opaque. You don't really see the operation. And I don't think, Solana is a blockchain, so I don't think either the Solana Foundation or Labs partnered with Coinbase. I just think that they have a lot of traction, and naturally Coinbase is going to capitalize on that traction by listing those tokens and doing all those things. I could be wrong, but I don't think it has to be like some sort of explicit partnership. And, if we go to Coinbase today and say, hey, you should do all of this on Tezos, they're going to say, come back later, come back when you have more activity, come back when you have more traction. So it's not like you can just replicate this directly. In terms of the Saga phone being sold out, the Saga phone was a complete flop. They lucked out because there's a meme coin called Bonk, which suddenly shot up out of nowhere. And it turned out that you could get $700 worth of Bonk coin by buying the phone, as opposed to, and the phone cost $600. And before someone says, well, you don't get it, that's the degen economy, that's how the whole space works. Yeah, but you can't engineer that. Like, you can't just create a phone, airdrop some random token, and hope that somehow among hundreds of meme coin, this one in particular is going to pop up. So I don't think you can really credit that. I would say like ex ante making the phone was a strategic mistake. And ex post, they lucked out with Bonk. Yes, I too hope that Tezos would be at the level that Solana is. But there's something to remember, which is that Solana shipped a pretty good product from a technical perspective. They had very high throughput. They had very low latency. They had very crappy resiliency though when they first launched. But that's a market proposal, and too often people in the Tezos community, I would say, don't appreciate the fact that for Tezos to be competitive, there's still quite a bit of work to do, I would say, on the core development. That's quite important if we want to be able to compete with those blockchains. The throughput has increased tremendously since 2021. I would say it's around 1,000 TPS on mainnet, and 1 million TPS we demonstrated with several rollups in parallel. But fundamentally, it's still not at the same levels of latency, for example, or simplicity. So there's quite a bit to learn, I would say, in terms of the product itself and the market offering of the product. But to a large extent, these things are circular. It's absolutely nuts to me that I read Twitter, and a few months ago, everyone is like, Ethereum is so obviously dominant. Look, everyone is going to move to become an L2 of Ethereum, and Ethereum obviously has it, and the future is obviously dominated by Ethereum. And you look a month later, and everyone is like, Ethereum has lost its way, and Solana is going to flip Ethereum, and it's all about Solana. And that's ridiculous. This thing doesn't change in a month. The only thing that happened is like the price of one rose a lot, and that's primarily what fuels this. The price rises, people get excited, and they make up narratives which justify more momentum trading. That's largely what's going on. It's not anything fundamental about Solana. These things are based on vibes and narrative to a large extent. Not only, I would say, there's a good product at the core of it. That's quite important and shouldn't be forgotten. And there's been good execution. But a lot of it is just very reflective as well.
Thank you for that, Arthur. The next question comes from Ogi, who says, epoxy rollups, in parentheses CK rollups, were not developed further. If I recall correctly, I think it was a blog post by Nomadic Labs. But it was suggested to include validity tech as a feature of the smart rollup itself. Is there any further development on this?
So the reason epoxy rollups were not further developed is that fundamentally, and even though they are quite competitive with a lot of the ZK solution out there, fundamentally, ZK rollup technology is not competitive with optimistic rollup technology. Optimistic rollup has more complexity around refutation game. It's tricky to get it right. I think we did, and very few people have. Optimism doesn't even bother with them. It's purely trusted. And in terms of the throughputs that you can get, in terms of the cost that you can get with optimistic rollup, it's just far ahead of what you can do with ZK rollups. And I love ZK rollup. I first proposed scaling with ZK rollup in 2017. It's one of my most popular blog posts. So I'm also like early angel investor in Starkware. So I get it. I get the value of ZK rollup. I just don't think they're competitive as a solution. And it's a bit of a contrarian play when everyone is focusing on, this ZK sync and all of that to not really slow down in this direction. Yes, there was an idea for using in smart rollups, so optimistic rollups, ZK tech. There's a few things you can do. One is you can eliminate refutation game by only computing a proof if and when you have a challenge. But it doesn't really help you all that much. You still have a lot of latency to prevent censorship when you want to do withdrawal. You still have all the complexity of building a circuit. Like it gives you the performance, but you also need to maintain a park of computers that's capable of computing a very complex proof once in a while. The other thing you can do is you can replace your virtual machine, your proof carrying virtual machine, with a ZK proof, essentially proving just a single step of the optimistic rollup as opposed to posting all the data and having it replayed on a chain. The benefit of that is that if you want to support not just WASM, but RISC or other type of VM, once you do this with zero knowledge, all you need is a new circuit and you don't need to modify much at the L1 level. So it gives you more flexibility, but there's quite a bit of complexity. And today it's not a priority.
Thank you, Arthur. The next question comes from Aaron V, who says, trying to be a blockchain for everyone doesn't seem to be winning folks over to Tez, as interoperability nears and blockchains define their main roles in the multi-chain world. Is there a foundational use case Tezos is going to define or remain in general use?
I mean, you're completely right in terms of where the narratives are and where, like, how maybe VCs are thinking and how people are thinking about this space. But I think it's completely wrong. Like, I don't believe at all in a future where you have a ton of chains talking to each other and interoperating with each other. And the reason is that bridges are expensive, bridges are brittle, bridges break. And I share the point of view of Etherlink on this. He has a great blog post about this as well. I don't think anyone, be it on Tezos or Ethereum, is going to go and get their data availability layer from some other chain, trying to add a brittle bridge when they could have the same integrated in one chain. So in terms of narrative, I suppose saying like, oh, Tez is going to be the blockchain for this type of, like, this part of the stack. It could play, but I also don't want to be disingenuous. And I don't believe in this at all. I believe in vertical integration. I believe essentially you have a blockchain that offers you all of these aspects, and that creates a much better product than if you had fragmentation. So I don't believe in this fragmentation thesis. I think the fragmentation thesis is convenient because it allows people to sell a bunch of tokens for different things that don't really need tokens. There's a different type of specialization that you can take, which is not a specialization in terms of technology, but which is specialization in terms of vertical. saying like, well, maybe the technology itself is common, the technology itself is generic, but the applications are not. Because fundamentally, a lot of the mode that you built is around network effects and network effects at the application and user level. And so focusing on a few verticals is one way to do that. And that I completely agree with. I think ultimately the end game is you want to be a blockchain for everyone, but initially you don't have to be. You can focus on areas which have good product market fit and which are very promising. Now we have some of those areas on Tezos. I think we need more than one. I don't think we can survive with just one. Clearly the one where Tezos has the most traction is the art community by far. And that's an extremely valuable part of our ecosystem. It's overall globally a small community, and the chain needs to be bigger. So culture is a generalization of this, arts and culture. You can grow a little beyond art, but I would say the success of most collectibles has been either in the gambling space or in the art space. Gaming is another one. I would say that games have been the first ones to use digital assets before blockchains were a thing. It's a natural use case. We were very early to it, but we didn't execute well. And now the cat's out of the bag. Like, people know that gaming is a thing. Although I would say the focus on play to earn is mistaken, and they are better games that can be built that are not around play to earn, that are around money, because fundamentally you're transferring money around. But it doesn't have to be basically like gamified Ponzi schemes. And finance in general, call it DeFi or finance on blockchain, money Legos. That's also a very important aspect. It's probably one with the most proven product market fits in the industry. So that's essentially what we've been focusing on. There's a few others which are of interest, but I don't think that the product market fit is not as good. So to some extent, it's about like what not to focus on. And there's a few things that a lot of people are excited about in the blockchain space that I think we can be strategic in skipping, specifically anything that doesn't actually deal with asset transfers.
Thank you so much. The next question again from Ogui or Ogi, and the question reads, could you please explain what Etherlink is? What Etherlink is, really, and how it will play an important role for Tezos?
So Etherlink is a Tezos Layer 2, and it's a Tezos Layer 2 that's 100% compatible with the Ethereum chain, or EVM. So it means that when you use Etherlink, you can use it, of course, with MetaMask. You can use it with all the developer tools. You can use it with Solidity. So it's a drop-in replacement for Ethereum, but it's built on top of Tezos. It has an exciting roadmap. So first of all, we're building a decentralized sequencer for it. Today, most sequencers are centralized. This is a decentralized sequencer, so you get the robustness of decentralization. We've seen, the Arbitrum sequencer goes down, but at the same time, very low latency. So we're talking about less than a second latency, even though it's on top of Tezos, which itself has more than 1 second, obviously more than 1 second per block. So very low latency. Real decentralization, it's not controlled by a multi-sig, like virtually every single L2 out there on Ethereum. It has permissionless fraud proof. Anyone can come in and verify. So it's an actual Ethereum rollup that's not centralized, and that provides best-in-class performance. I think it's quite useful because there are a lot of people who want to build in a Tezos ecosystem, but who also want the EVM compatibility for ease of development, because perhaps they are using multiple chains, perhaps they already have developers who know Solidity. So there's value in doing that. Now, at the same time, I recognize that there are about 20 alt EVM solutions out there. You could be using an L1 like Avalanche, you could be doing Optimism, you could be doing Arbitrum, you could be using a lot of other solutions. But I would say that we can bring something that's both best in class and at the same time decentralized, which is not something that's being offered. We're also doing exciting research around MEV prevention and ensuring that when you use this rollup, you don't have the validators extracting money from you or selling your transactions to other parties who can take advantage of that, which is quite useful for DeFi. So that's what Etherlink is. And obviously, I would say Etherlink is just one step. The goal is to build a big rollup that will support mainstream programming languages, that will support Michelson, that will support EVM, because at the end of the day, let me put it this way, EVM compatibility is important because there's been billions put into EVM tooling, and it's just like very, very dominant. It's important to offer it. doesn't mean it's better than Michelson. Michelson is much better language for writing smart contracts if you have to pick. But the point is grow this rollup and add more languages, Michelson, EVM, mainstream programming languages of everything. So Etherlink is a step to that, but I would also say it can stand on its own as a product. And I would say, you were also asking about an ETF for the data availability layer. The data availability layer at first is going to launch without incentives. So essentially, we rely on bakers actually downloading the data and not pretending that they download the data. And that, I would say, is expected in Protocol P, the first half of 2024. And incentives would be probably in the second half of 2024 in Protocol Q. This is subject to revisions, of course. Right now, we are looking to accelerate a bit the development of Etherlink. Initially, the idea was to launch Etherlink without a sequencer, to basically just use the L1 as a sequencer. But the latency is really high. And what market research showed is that what a lot of people associate with L2s is not the low fees or anything like that. What they associate with L2s is a very low latency. That's like a part that's very important to them. That doesn't come from being an L2, that comes from having a sequencer. So we realized it was important to launch that, but we also didn't want to have a centralized sequencer. So that's kicked off research in decentralized sequencers.
All right, thank you. The next question is from Get Real, who asks, Arthur, why do you think the Tezos community is so obsessed and vocal about the Tezos Foundation? We don't see the same kind of obsession with the Ethereum Foundation and the Ethereum community. So why is this the case in Tezos land?
I'm so glad you're touching on this. And it's true. And it's very, very, very unappreciated. And I have theories, but at the end of the day, regardless of my theories, we are where we are. Yeah, you don't hear people like complain all that much about, the Interchain Foundation, although Interchain a little bit, or the Near Foundation, or the Ethereum Foundation, or any of these things. And people will say, well, it's because people are dissatisfied with, traders are dissatisfied with the price of Tez, and that's why they talk about it. But no, because there's a bunch of other like products who have like struggled in similar ways, and you don't hear as much. I think it stems back from 2017. Essentially, the crisis put the Tezos Foundation in a front light, and there was at the time a need to organize a community against the Tezos Foundation, because that was the one way to oust the psychopath who was running the show. And unfortunately, I think the culture stayed there. The culture of like, we just have to fight TF, and it was instrumental at one point. It was very important, but now it's just toxic and counterproductive. Which is not to say that like the TF always does a good job. There's a lot of things which I think are broken inside the Tezos Foundation operations. Like there's a lot of room for improvement. Don't get me wrong. But I also think like the amount of attention and the amount of hatred that it goes online is just staggering. But yeah, part of it I would say is a culture. Part of it is a transparency tax. I would say from the beginning, the Tezos Foundation wanted to put itself forward and say, look, with the Tezos Foundation, there was the amount of money raised, I would say in 2017, which like put a lot of like stars in people's eye. And there was a coterie of people who looked at the Tezos, the Tezos project not as a blockchain, but like as a grant program. Yeah. The first strategy of the foundation was say, let's do nothing. Let's just give grants to people to do things. And that creates an entire ecosystem of people just vying for grants. And some grantees have been absolutely remarkable people who've done a great job, but there's been a lot of grift, and it creates result. Like a lot of people, like a formula that's worked for a lot of people is get a bunch of money for the foundation. And if you don't get your money, you just go on social media and then you complain. That's been a very, very common pattern. And it's hard to deal with that in terms of comms, because you don't want to throw people under the bus and say, actually, that's a crazy person who's asking us to pay their personal expenses, or it's a crazy person who's, sending like letters filled with insults and threats. You don't want to go out and say that, but at the same time, then, you have like, well, this person is telling us that the foundation is being an evil and not paying them, and the foundation is not saying anything. So what are we to believe? And it's tough. I think that's part of the problem.
All right. Thank you so much, Arthur. And also thank you for being here while you're ill. The next question is, or next 4 questions is from Julian. They're all sort of related, so I'll go off of them and list them all at once. So Julian asks, how can you explain the downtrend of contract calls and number of transactions on Tezos? Why is Tezos failing at retaining their users? What do you think can be done to concretely reverse these trends? And how do you feel looking at these charts?
Well, let's see. 1 second. So I haven't looked. Yeah, I've seen the chart that you're talking about, and I have to crunch the data. I think for a while there was a spike of user of plenty with the with incentives. So sometimes it could just be like a farm has ended or something like that. But yeah, generally speaking, I would say there's been less activity in the Tezos ecosystem, perhaps because it's been a time of transformation, a time of refocus, and that's part of it. But in terms of reversing those trends, I think that Tezos has to offer something that's not being offered by any other blockchain. That's fundamentally what we'll do. It's like trying to incentivize people to use the chain will not, if it's not the best commercial or technical solution for them, will not work. And sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. And I would say the best thing that can be done is make sure that it is. Make sure that there's absolutely no better thing that you can use than Tezos today for your application and for your users.
Thank you, Arthur. The next question comes from GLBKST, who asks, what is Tezos 2.0 really about? There seems to already be support for Lego JavaScript or Python contracts, so what's the planned difference? And are the current Tezos tools on par with the EVM tools?
So yes, there's support for Lego.js and SmartPy, but Lego.js and SmartPy are not. So Lego.js has a syntax that's inspired by TypeScript, but it's not TypeScript. You can't drop in a TypeScript library and use it directly. SmartPy is closer to Python, but again, you can't just like take a Python module and drop it directly and use it. What we're talking about here is actual support for JavaScript and Python, which means you can use all of the tooling that goes around the languages, all of the libraries that goes around those languages. Depending on the type of application that you do, it may or may not be the right choice for you. Personally, I prefer to use a minimalistic language for security, but so far the market demand has been developer experience and developer convenience at the expense of almost anything else. So I would say, and part of that is because multi-sig are acceptable. So in a world where no one wants to use a dApps that is controlled by a multi-sig, or in a world where you can't legally operate a dApp with a multi-sig, the security is super important because you're not going to be able to upgrade your contract. So you need to get it right, absolutely right on the first try. In a world where you just upgrade your contract, essentially you can say, well, all I have to do is to scan my code and search for exploits faster than the hackers will, and sometimes it'll work out and sometimes it won't, as we've seen. But in this instance, I would say mainstream programming languages there's clear demand for them. Are the current Tezos tool on par with EVM tools? Yes, I would say so. But in some sense, it's moot because pretty soon we'll be able to use all the EVM tools for developing on Tezos with Etherlink and then with Tezos 2.0 anyway.
Thank you. The next question comes from Gooey. I'd like to know what Arthur thinks about Tezos DeFi. We're behind in user experience, particularly on Swap. I'm pronouncing that wrong. Colibri, Swap, Colibri, which are among the most used applications. There have been grants to build on Uniswap V3 type DEX, but in the end, the use remains very limited.
Yeah, I would say that this is a hard one to answer. I think we need better DeFi, to put it another way, and we need more innovative DeFi. Essentially, there's two types of DeFi projects outside of the Tezos ecosystem. You have the so-called copy-paste project, which takes Solidity code, copy it, and then run it somewhere else. And that's very low effort, but it will give you some DeFi protocol, and then there's some farming around it or something like that. And then you have innovative DeFi, which is much more rare. And in Tezos, we have, you can't copy paste from EVM. So we have people who replicate the code of other things. So that takes development effort, but at the end of the day, it's missing a lot of innovation. So it provides a useful service. If you need to be able to trade tokens on Tezos, you have this infrastructure. Like you can actually create loans backed by tokens. You can actually trade them. You can actually do all of these things. So it's possible. But what fundamentally Tezos DeFi needs is more usage, because with usage come fees, with fees come revenues, and with revenues comes the ability to finance more DeFi and more development. So that's the principal issue. But I would say for Tezos to be competitive in DeFi, we would need to have more assets on the chain. So the paucity of assets that people might want to trade is part of the issue. Better UX and lower latency. I would say that's a factor. And yes, liquidity is a factor, but I think liquidity comes last in a sense. Like if you don't have a good user experience in the first place, and if you don't have the assets that people are interested in trading, putting liquidity you're going to create a lot of impermanent loss essentially. And yes, you'll create some fees, but you're not necessarily going to to create a thriving ecosystem like this. So I would start with the assets. I think that's the most important part for having successful DeFi.
Amazing. The next question comes from August Ground, who asks, why doesn't the Tezos Foundation or Trilitech do any marketing or public outreach with any of the incredible artists on the chain? Or do any incentives or reward artists who do all the heavy lifting of their PR?
Yeah, I think they should. I would say like part of the reason is there hasn't been a working marketing function for nearly a year. And so that's been part of the issue. But obviously leveraging the amazing artist community we have around Tezos for around marketing and public outreach is a great idea. And it's something that should be explored.
Amazing. Moving on. The next question is from Tezos Online, who has two questions. The first one is, who is leading the charge on marketing for Tezos going into 2024? The second one reads, where will Tezos make the most impact on people in the world?
There are small marketing functions in different places. So there's a bit of marketing and PR happening inside of Manic Labs. There's some happening in TZ APAC. There's a bigger marketing function that's currently being built inside of Trilitech, who recently hired a CMO, I think, which is focused on really driving marketing for the Tezos blockchain in general, globally in 2024. In terms of where would Tezos make the most impact on people in the world, I would go back to the fundamentals of blockchains. I think that the impact, the value is in censorship resistant payments, censorship resistant transfers. That's disintermediation. Those are the fundamental and key aspect of blockchains, and there's the one that will keep mattering. So I would say any use case that's successful on Tezos is going to be a little bit subversive, and that's true of art. Art has always been a bit subversive, and that's probably where we'll see the impact is in replacing existing institutions and existing intermediaries with direct connections between people.
Amazing, thank you. The next question again comes from Gui, who asks, what is the impact of liquidity baking on the XDC price? Is someone monitoring this?
Well, there's difference there. You can't directly measure that. It's a bit difficult to measure. There's one approach which is say, look, fundamentally, you are. I forgot what the rate of inflation around it is. Let's say it's like something around like 0.5% or something like that per year. So it's a very low number. And so one way to look at it is to say, well, you dilute the supply by 0.5%. So all else equal, in like a very classical economics framework, the impact should be 0.5%, which is quite small, all things considered. There's another approach which you say, no, it's based on flows, basically because most people just, actually a very small fraction of the supply is actually traded. A lot of it just sits there. And as a result, the selling pressure that comes from it is actually a larger proportion of the circulating float. I don't think so. I mean, I think you have, one way you could look at it is you could look at flows on exchanges on a given day, saying like how much of a flow today was selling, how much on it was buying. And you could look at days where like it's not like news driven specifically. And then you could get some notion of like price sensitivity to flows and perhaps get an answer from this. My intuition is very little. I would say like much smaller compared to the effect of like baking as a whole. But primarily, I would say the rationale for liquidity baking was let's try to bring more liquidity between Tez and Bitcoin on chain, and I think it does that. I would say that there's still issues with the TZBTC asset, which should probably be. There's a couple of things that could be done. Like first, now that we have Uniswap v3 DEX, replace the DEX with a Uniswap v3 DEX. This would be way more capital efficient. So you'd get more liquidity for the same dilution, or you could get like the same liquidity for less dilution. That would be one. Another thing would be trying to get a better bridge Bitcoin. Some people have suggested doing stable coins. The problem with stable coin is that you get way more, like a dollar stable coin, you get way more impermanent loss. So it actually costs you much. It costs you much more to get liquidity, whereas there's plenty of liquidity in the Bitcoin pair. Like you gain inconvenience, so maybe there's just like more direct usage of it. But it depends if you think of it as like people are going to use this on chain. Is it like a utility on chain that you use, or if you think of like this is a reservoir, and when people trade on exchange, there's an arbitrage that happens with liquidity baking, and in some sense, it brings liquidity on the exchange by an arbitrage relationship. And if you think of the latter, then clearly the better pair asset is BTC. If you think of like the on-chain convenience, sure, like the stablecoin makes more sense. And then on the camp of like the latter, but it also came from like an analytical report that we had around liquidity in 2021. And reflecting on it, I don't know like how much of these were like negotiation tactics as opposed to like real liquidity. Generally speaking, the liquidity for Tez compared to other coins, like if you look at the volume traded compared to market cap, compared to other coins, it's lower. It's not much lower. It is lower. And if it were much lower, I would consider that, hey, maybe this is a big issue. The fact that it's only lower and not much lower makes me more ambivalent. I know it's much lower though in perpetuals, and I think part of that may be the fact that if you have collateral for perpetual on some platform and it's not set up for delegation, you basically like add 5% to your funding rates that you're not recouping. So that could be part of the problem.
Thank you. The next question comes from Malicious Sheep, who asks, with the outreach investment targeted to male demographics and multiple IRL use cases / integrations for Tezos available, how will the Tezos Foundation pivot to expand the target demographics to include equity-deserving groups in both advertising, but also in direct outreach and education?
Yeah, generally speaking, I forgot where those stats came from, but I think in terms of, there's many ways to slice through different groups, but like you mentioned male, and in terms of like male-female demographics, I would say, I remember saying that Tezos was one that was most balanced. Obviously, the crypto space is very, very male-centric, male-dominated, and it's less true for Tezos, and we have initiatives in this space. Definitely with the art vertical, there's a lot more people involved in art who are women, and it's been a big part of our initiatives. So generally continuing in this direction, and we have a few initiatives also just to reach out to broader groups. But it raises an interesting question, which is to me, there's two ways to think about it. One is, look, we're playing from behind. We have powerful incumbents who have a lot of users. And there's two ways you can have more users. You can take users from the incumbents, or you can bring new users into crypto. The benefit of like new users into crypto is that you're not competing. It's a green field. Essentially, you don't have to convince them that you're better than Ethereum or Solana. All of this. They're naive to crypto, and you give them the first experience, they have a best experience, and they have a great and then they forge some brand loyalty potentially. The downside is that, if these people have not involved themselves in the space for many years, it means maybe they're like naturally less interested. And so the cost of user acquisition, like typically the cost of user acquisition, if you are a challenger, is lower when you take users from the incumbent. And it's the incumbents who have a lot of money, a lot of power, who say like, well, how do I grow the pie? If you are, let's say, like Binance as an exchange, your primary concern is not how much traffic is going to other exchanges, but like, how do I get more people trading crypto in general? If you are a very small exchange, it's like, how do I get users from the other ones? So I think it's like a balance of those two strategies and seeing what works and iterating on that.
Amazing. Thank you. Next question comes from Moon6, and we have two questions from Moon6. I'll start with the first one, and then I'll ask the second one right afterwards.
Okay.
What is the status of the Google x Tezos partnership for bakers and startups announced 9 months ago?
Yeah, so there's no Google Tezos partnership. There's a partnership between the Tezos Foundation and Google, or should I say Alphabet. And essentially it provides nodes for if you want to use Google Cloud and if you want to have access to Tezos RPCs and services, that's something that's available to you. We also have GCP credits for people who want to use Google Cloud for the Tezos application. There's more that Google should be doing, and we're pushing very hard for it to happen. But it's been unfortunately a very slow process.
Thank you. The next question from Moon6 is, what is the status of the GET protocol integration to Tezos announced 6 months ago? Tezos was announced as the primary chain their ticketing system will run on.
Yeah, they're waiting for Etherlink because essentially, all their stuff is EVM, and so they'll deploy on Etherlink, but we haven't shipped Etherlink yet.
Thank you. We go back to Julian with yet another question, who asks, there was 2 weeks between the Nomadic Labs blog post, I'm assuming, about Oxford 2 and then and the 10-second block interval. Why not include it into Oxford 2? Why do we have to wait another 5 months for the block time to be reduced?
Well, sadly, it's because we get rejected proposals sometimes. The Oxford proposal was rejected. And so as a result, we really, anything that we see can be potentially controversial. We have to really, and I don't think it should be, but we really have to push to put forward. And so like the reason is to have a comment period to see if people are happy to move to a 10-second block time.
Amazing, thank you. The next question comes from Lucky Tukul. I'm pronouncing that wrong, but she asks, what is your vision for the arts and gaming and what is your vision for the arts, culture, and gaming on Tezos?
Well, that's very that's very broad. So I would say like one of the things that unifies them a lot is collectibles. Although I would say, you know, in the art and culture, you'll have a lot of pure collectibles. In gaming, you can do things that aren't just collectibles. Like for example, you know, one of the first use cases that Satoshi Nakamoto tried to build for Bitcoin was poker playing. So, you know, I would say it's a game that makes sense. For example, on a blockchain, also many people have tried, and it hasn't been that successful. But it just shows that, you know, there are proof of existence of non-collectible strategies in the gaming vertical. But broadly speaking, I would say that I personally enjoy collecting things, and with everything moving in the digital realm, there's been a joy of collecting that has disappeared. Specifically, you mentioned culture, and I always go back to music because people love to collect music, and we've lost a lot of the physical media that we could collect. And having digital media that can be collected and that can be meaningful token representation of, you know, a piece of music, a piece of culture is super important. And it's a way also for artists to potentially fund themselves. So yes, ideally, would I like to? I'd rather live in a world where music artists could sell programmatic royalties to their song. There's a lot of regulatory hurdles to that, but at least selling collectibles in Patreon-like type of experience is something that I think we can see. And the culture space can touch hundreds of millions of users. So if there's like one thing that could take blockchains beyond, you know, a few 100,000 people farming a coin or doing some type of trading activities to something that's really very, very big and very mainstream, I would say it's culture and digital collectibles. It's tough because, you know, people have a lot of things to do. They have a lot of money to spend. They have a lot of things to spend money on that are not symbolic digital representations. But nonetheless, I think there's a there. And it's also like I oftentimes think that things can be interesting when the criticism is bad. And the criticism of the NFT space is often very bad because it focuses on some of the excesses, some of the clear gambling applications without looking at the substance. And the fact that the substance is overlooked tell me that it's interesting.
Thank you for that, Arthur. Yet another question from Julian, the last one. Can you please confirm if all members of the Tezos Foundation are working full-time, which could explain why they are so silent? Many have a feeling that the Tezos Foundation is not involved / not promoting Tezos as much as they should be.
So it depends what you mean by a member. There are two types of people inside the Tezos Foundation. There's a council. And so the council has members. So I think maybe you're referring to the council. And then there's employees of the foundation in general. So as far as I can tell, all the employees of the foundation are full-time. But a council is a council. It's, you know, it's similar to a board. So it's definitely not a full-time position at all. The board meets basically quarterly to review activities. So, you know, typically when you have like a board or a council or foundation, they are tasked with like overseeing strategic direction and governance of the organization. Like the capacity, and myself, I am, you know, that's my capacity as a board member. It's a supervisory and advisory capacity. So yes, like the council is going to make key decisions on policy, strategy, like financial matters, but they're not managers. They're not involved in the day-to-day operation of the organization. And I'm glad you asked that, because when I hear like, why isn't the council like, you know, like active daily on Twitter, is like, that's because they're a board. You know, so if you want to hear more from employees of the foundation, like I think that's fair. You know, if you're an employee in a foundation, although I think it's better to work, you know, like through community managers, because you don't want like necessarily people spending their lives on Twitter answering questions. But like, this is not the board. The board is not a marketing agency for this foundation. The board is not an executive team, and that really needs to be understood. And I feel like a lot of people don't get that, and that's true of any board anywhere.
Thank you, Arthur. Yet another question from Moon6, who asks, what are the advantages of Ethereum Layer 2s or Cosmos chains to use the Tezos DAL versus Celestia or Near DALs?
Well, if and when the DAL ships, which I think is like 2024, like I said, if there's a, you know, fundamentally, you are selling a commodity, right? Largely, which is like block space. So how can you distinguish this commodity? Well, there's two things. One is security. You could argue that you have better security in your DAO design, and the other one is cost. You could have more capacity in your DAO design, and as a result, the cost would be lower. I've seen some numbers, and it seems like the cost of Celestia is actually quite high, and part of that is because of their design, where the validators have to download everything, as opposed to sharding the data. So they shard the data for sampling, but they don't shard the data for the validators who store everything. We do. The DAO in Tezos is fully sharded, so potentially it would be cheaper. That would be the main reason to use it.
All right. Thank you.
Very often it's the main reason to use any product over another one. Especially like commodities. Like, why would you buy, oil from like this refinery versus this refinery? Well, this one is cheaper. That's you're not selling handbags.
All right. Thank you, Arthur. We have 2 more questions to go. The first one is from Get Real, who asks, market cap ranking is, rightfully or not, the leading indicator for a blockchain success in this space. What does Tezos leading the top 70 show us about the Tezos Foundation's mission and how successful they are at fulfilling it? Why is more focus not put on the price of the coin?
Sure. So let me split the question in a couple things. In a couple things, because there's an assumption at the beginning. One is like, how well is TF doing in general? Like, how well is the Tezos ecosystem doing? And the second thing is like, what to make of the market cap ranking. So primarily, I would say that this thing trades on sentiment, and this thing trade on reflexivity. Things get hyped, and people get excited by the hype, and things don't get hype, and it's very, very circular. And there's no economic relationship between the success of a blockchain in terms of like adoption and all of these things and its market price. There's none. The one thing that people try to argue is that if people burn fees, if people use a chain a lot and burn a lot of fees, then essentially you have some form of deflation, and that creates demand for the token because people need the token to pay the fees to burn it, and that kind of like completes the economic loop. The flaw with that idea is that we've managed, it made sense at a time where blockchains were very expensive, but we've managed to make blockchains scale. The cost of transactions now is ridiculously low. It costs very little to do 1 million TPS, and the demand in the space is also generally low. So the clearing price for transaction in the future is probably going to be very close to zero. So I doubt it can be a meaningful driver of anything. Bonk is not successful Bonk is not successful because of like its fantastic roadmap or like user adoption or any of that. And the meme peel is to realize that every coin is a meme coin. And yes, regulators will try to argue that no, it depends on activity, but basically they are propagating a lie. It doesn't. Maybe in people's heads, sometimes it does, but there's no hard economic relationship between the two. And that's something that's very important to appreciate. But clearly not, clearly being completely out of people's mind and being there is not a sign of success. It's terrible, and it's profoundly depressing. And in terms of like TF's mission, there's many ways you could measure it besides the market cap. You could measure it in terms of like adoption, and you could measure it in many other things. And yes, I think it's remiss in its mission. We've not been doing well for the past 3 years. However, there is one thing that we're doing better. I would say operations themselves have improved a lot. Operational efficiency, the ability to ship protocol upgrades. So a lot of the ability to control budgets, a lot of the thing inside the foundation or the entities around them, they're not where I wish that they were, right? I think they still need a lot of improvement. But I also know that they've kept getting better, and they've been getting better year after year after year. And it started from a very low place in 2021. So I still think there's still a lot to do to improve them. There's still a lot to do to improve the technology behind Tezos. So no, I would say, to talk about like TF's mission and success, I don't think that broadly TF has been successful in its mission over the past few years, but it is getting better. The entities around it are getting better. I have no idea whether or not that has an impact on market cap. The third thing is like, why not more focus on the price of the coin? Because you focus on the things which are actionable. It's not like you can change this by decree. There's no action that you can take that would actually have an impact. The things you can control, and again, there's no economic links. The things you can potentially impact is perception of the chain, like how many people know about it. The things you can potentially impact are how many people are using it. how good it is. Like those are things which can be executed upon, and execution needs to be much, much better, but it is getting better. However, it does not necessarily, I want to make this clear. It does not necessarily translate into like price momentum or any of these things. And that's the reality of the space.
Thank you so much, Arthur. One last question, and then we'll wrap this up. From Malicious Sheep, who asks, what currently is the greatest existential and or legal threat to the Tezos chain? And in what ways can the community assist in educating about limiting risks to that threat? What jurisdictions or institutions should the community keep their efforts focused on?
I'm so glad someone is asking this, because sometimes I get questions and it feels like there's no awareness at all of this. And I understand, because I seeped into it for years, but it's such an important part of the space that I'm always a little surprised when it's just when people are not aware of it. So thank you for asking that. In terms of like, the main existential threat is that, obviously regulators around the world are trying to like put different regulatory regimes on this, but most of them are livable. But, in the United States, they are trying to ban cryptocurrencies, and they're not just trying to pass legislation to ban cryptocurrencies because you can react to legislation. They're trying to make bad faith arguments in court that somehow they've always been illegal, like based on laws written at the beginning of the 20th century. No, that somehow apply. And these are very sketchy legal arguments, and some of them have started to lose in court. But it's still a massive risk that looms around the space. That if the Supreme Court gets it wrong, it's a massive risk for the space. And the United States considers that it has jurisdiction beyond its border. It considers that anyone who's ever been in a McDonald's has a U.S. nexus, essentially. So I would say familiarize yourself with the stance of U.S. regulators, like specifically the SEC. They put out a things got also much worse in 2021. Before 2021, they were trying to put together frameworks, and there was a framework published for digital assets, which doesn't have the force of law. It's their opinions. It's about 40 pages, but I highly recommend reading it. And since then, they've kind of moved away from this, and they've basically said anything that moves is security. But if you go back to like the previous position that the agency had like a few years ago, it's remarkable how it's remarkable that there's not more awareness of this and how much it affects almost everything in the industry.
All right. Thank you so much, Arthur. That's all of the questions we had. Do you have any closing words for the audience or the people who are listening back to this?
Do I have questions for the audience?
No, if you have any closing words, anything you want to let the people know, the mic is yours.
Well, I mean, I'm quite excited for what's going to shape in 2024, and I made this. I gave this message before, and I'll say it again. Adoption is important. If you really want to drive adoption, you need to drive it by having an amazing product. And I like Tezos as a product. It has a lot going for it. It has a lot that a lot of other chains have, and it has a soul, and it has a lot of benefits. But that's not enough. It needs to be the absolute best. And we can get there. I'm very excited about getting there. And I think it's a lot easier when you have the best product on the market to get a ton more adoption. It's much easier when you can onboard any developer anywhere on your platform, when they have very low latency, when they're paying almost no fees. That's a very strong value prop, and we shouldn't dismiss that. It's true that some people have managed to make it work without it. So Polygon, for example, with really bad technology, did manage to get a lot of traction in 2021. But they had like a giant treasury, and they threw a lot of money at pay-for-play, and a lot of these people now are leaving Polygon. So they kind of like try to pivot by building real technology, but it's been a bit of a difficult pivot for them. So I would say there's so much that's coming, and there's so much also that, let me put it this way, beyond all of the issues that I've discussed, there's two things. One is like, we do need more operational efficiency in entities and in the Tezos Foundation. And yes, we do need, I would say, a stronger technological offering. But even beyond that, like the delta between the perception of Tezos and where it's actually at in terms of adoption, in terms of technology, is gigantic. The fact that we probably have the best rollup technology out there. It's not enough, but like we still have the best rollup technology out there, and that people have no idea is still a very, very big gap. So I'm excited about closing that gap. I'm excited about being able to convey that to people, to convey the existing offering already, because that's just completely overlooked. It's people don't talk about Tezos. People kind of forgot about Tezos, and I think we can remind them of that. And there's a lot of low hanging fruits here.
There definitely is. Thank you so much for that. You certainly made me and likely a lot of audience members even more excited for what's to come in 2024. A huge thank you to you for coming out and doing this, even though you're ill and been coughing a bit throughout the space. Thank you so much for that. And thanks to everybody in the audience who's been listening to this and to the people listening back. If you joined midway through, don't worry. This space will be available to listen back to on Twitter, and it will also be uploaded on YouTube, and it'll be all over social media in a few days, or hopefully today, if we can turn around it this fast. But thanks again, Arthur, and thanks to everybody who came and listened to this. This was great.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.